Imagine for a moment stepping into the shoes of those who came before us. Welcome to a journey that transforms history into vibrant stories that captivate and inspire. You are standing in the middle of a vast and whispering grassland. The wind tickles the tips of the tall feather grass, and the sky above you stretches on forever, a piercing, endless blue so wide it feels like you might fall upward into it. There are no cities here, no stone temples, no scrolls or minarets or call to prayer. Just the wind, the herds, and the pulse of hooves moving across the earth like distant thunder. This is the world of the Mongols before Islam, a land ruled by the eternal blue sky Tengri, a divine faceless presence that watches over everything, yet demands little except respect. You live by the bow, by the herd, by your loyalty to your clan. You wear fox pelts and burn incense in yurts. Shamanic rituals echo around bonfires, and people speak of wolves as ancestors and eagles as messengers. Your gods are everywhere and nowhere. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please post your location and local time. I love knowing where you're tuning in from. Wherever you are, I hope tonight brings you rest, comfort, and maybe a curious dream or two. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You ride with your brothers under starlight, the soft padding of horses muffled against frost-bitten grass. A lamb's bleat echoes from the distant pastures, and your mother once told you that if you hear it in the dark, it's the spirits calling. There is no word for religion yet. Not really. Faith is just the air you breathe, the smoke you offer. The shaman wears antlers and speaks in riddles, asking the spirits to bless your arrows and keep away the illnesses brought by the black wind. It's all deeply spiritual and wildly confusing if you're used to scripture. Even birth is a sacred crossing. When a child is born, the yurt is tied with a sacred cord. No strangers may enter. You must burn herbs to cleanse bad omens. And when someone dies, you don't bury them in a stone tomb. You leave them in the open steppe exposed to the elements, a sky funeral. Yes, even death in this world feels like it's returning to the sky. But let's be clear, you probably won't survive this. The winters are brutal, the feud's constant, and there's always the risk your neighbor's horse will trample your camp in a drunken dispute over fermented mare's milk. It happens more than you'd think. Still, there's a strange harmony here. You know every mountain and river by name. You believe the stars speak, and your tribe holds tight to the old ways. But the world is changing. Somewhere far to the west, cities are rising with tiled domes and people who pray 5 times a day. People who wash before eating. People who write laws in books instead of memorizing the chieftain's angry rants. People who do not drink blood from a yak's neck for breakfast. And across the horizon, whispers carry rumors of a man born with a blood clot in his fist, a sign of destiny. His name is Temujin. Soon he will unite the tribes and become Genghis Khan. And no matter what gods he prays to or doesn't, the world will never be the same again. There's no mosque yet, no minaret, but the wind already carries the scent of change. You return to your camp under a moon so bright it feels like a quiet sun. An elder murmurs of a dream, a vision of foreign lands bowing before horsemen. You wonder if that dream will bring your people greatness, or something else entirely. And far, far away, a muezzin's call crackles faintly through the desert wind, unheard for now, but destined to become part of your people's story. You wake to the creak of rawhide tents and the earthy aroma of morning fires. The steppe sun has only just begun to peek over the horizon, gilding the grasslands in a soft bronze light. Somewhere nearby, a goat bleats irritably as a child chases it with a ladle. Life rolls on as it always has, and yet today feels different. There's a new tension in the wind, something alive and alert. And in the center of camp, surrounded by warriors and whisperers, stands the man who will change everything, Genghis Khan. Only, he doesn't call himself that yet. Right now, he's still Temujin, born clutching a blood clot, raised in exile, once starving, once enslaved, and now leader of men. His rise hasn't been mystical or holy. It's been dirty, violent, and somehow logical. You've seen him break alliances, forge new ones, outwit enemies with both arrows and words. But there's something almost supernatural about how the others follow him, as if fate itself nudges him forward. What he is not, however, is Muslim. Temujin's soon-to-be Genghis has no interest in bowing to Mecca or reciting prayers in Arabic. His god is still Tengri, the blue sky. His rituals are still bloody, still wrapped in smoke and silence. But, and here's where things get curious, he is strangely tolerant. Not out of some modern love for diversity, mind you. More because banning religions wastes time. And time is horses, and horses are conquest. So he lets them be. The Buddhists, the Christians, the Muslims, the fire worshippers, he gives them all space to breathe, so long as they don't stir up trouble. And if they offer him wisdom, even better. Genghis is famously practical. If a Muslim doctor can cure dysentery faster than a shaman's goat bones, guess who gets the job? It's one of those moments in history where ruthless efficiency accidentally creates religious freedom. In fact, one of the most underrated things about Genghis Khan's reign is his religious policy. He issues a decree, an actual royal law, exempting religious leaders from taxes and forced labor. Imams, monks, priests, astrologers, all get the VIP pass. Why? Because Genghis believes the gods are powerful and you never know which one is watching. Can't hurt to stay on their collective good side. You watch as caravans pass through the steppe under banners of all kinds. Muslim merchants from Samarkand, Christian envoys from Georgia, Taoist monks from China. They're all heading to Karakoram, the Mongol capital that doesn't quite exist yet. Just a few yurts and a big tent where the Khan holds court. Still, it's the beating heart of a future empire, and the whispers are growing. In those early years, the Mongols aren't converting, but they're absorbing, listening, asking questions. It's almost funny, the man who will destroy entire cities also sends for scholars. Genghis recruits engineers from the Muslim world to build siege engines because when you're trying to flatten a city wall, it doesn't really matter which god the architect prays to. One story claims that Genghis took a liking to a Muslim mathematician who could calculate eclipses. Not because he feared the heavens, he just wanted to time his campaigns better. March during a full moon. Maybe. Avoid that superstitious solar eclipse thing. Definitely. Historians still argue whether Genghis ever leaned toward one faith over another. Some say he remained stubbornly shamanistic to the end. Others think he had a soft spot for Buddhism. A few point out that he built temples and shrines for all kinds of gods just in case. The truth, as usual, is probably lost beneath a pile of yak hides and contradictory scrolls. Still, despite all his tolerance, Genghis is no theologian. He's a conqueror. His interest in religion is always practical. If it doesn't help him win or rule, it's irrelevant. But his openness plants seeds. His sons and grandsons raised among Persian scholars, Turkic traders, and Chinese advisors will grow up in a much different world than the windswept one you stand in now. And as you ride beside the young warriors training their hawks and sharpening blades, you wonder what will those seeds become? Will the next generation believe in the blue sky? Or in something brought west by caravans and calligraphers? Tonight the fire crackles low and you hear the murmured chants of a Muslim merchant reciting the Quran under his breath. No one stops him. No one mocks him. A few even sit nearby listening, not understanding the words, but catching the rhythm, the cadence. It is not yet a conversion, but it is unmistakably a beginning. The smoke of distant fires lingers in the morning air, curling gently over the grasslands as you stir from your bedroll. You stretch, listening to the chatter of camp, clanging pots, neighing horses, and the low murmur of prayers. But not shamanic ones this time. Somewhere near the edge of the camp, a voice rises in Arabic, steady and rhythmic. It's a Muslim trader from Bukhara murmuring his dawn prayer. And no one seems to mind. This is the strange paradox of the Mongol Empire, an empire that will raze your city to ash and then politely ask if your priests need anything. You ride through settlements flattened by Genghis Khan's troops and still find monasteries left standing like stone islands in a sea of soot. Why? Because Genghis believed in fear, yes, but he also believed in paperwork. And one of his most unusual imperial tools was the yasa, a sweeping code of law that, oddly enough, includes instructions for religious tolerance. It's within this framework that something even stranger happens. Genghis Khan issues a decree protecting all religious figures and institutions: imams, monks, rabbis, astrologers. They all get tax exemption and freedom from forced military service. Not bad, really, considering most empires force you to either fight or tithe. Here, just wear your funny hat chant to your preferred deity and don't annoy the local governor. You ride to a border post where a Mongol commander is reviewing documents. He waves through a Sufi mystic carrying manuscripts, a Buddhist monk with scrolls strapped to his yak, and even a Christian bishop with a small chest of incense. It's like a weird episode of Step Customs, and everyone's paperwork is mysteriously in order. There's logic to this madness. Genghis isn't spiritual in the sense of mystical devotion. He's spiritual like a man playing divine roulette. Which god is real? Which prophet holds the truth? Maybe all of them, maybe none. But if even one has power, best not to offend him. And he's practical too. Religious institutions are hubs of literacy. Monks can copy orders, preserve laws, translate treaties. Imams can track lunar cycles for campaign planning. Astrologers, well, Mongols love astrologers. Apparently, no one lays siege to a city during Mercury retrograde, or at least not without serious complaints from the archery corps. Quirky footnote: Mongol envoys were notorious for showing up at foreign courts and saying things like, "Your king must submit to our great Khan, because the eternal blue sky wills it." Then they'd present a letter written in elegant Persian script, wax-sealed and decorated with symbols that meant absolutely nothing to the local scribes. Diplomacy Mongol style. And yet this mishmash of religion and conquest starts to do something strange. The more Mongols interact with Muslim scholars, the more curious they become. Not just about theology, but about science, medicine, even city planning. Remember, these are people who lived in tents and drank fermented milk. Suddenly, they're learning about irrigation hospitals, algebra, and hygiene rituals that involve more than a handful of snow and hope. Still, you wouldn't call it a religious awakening. Not yet. The Mongols admire Muslims. The way a cat admires a fish tank. They're fascinated but detached. There's no widespread conversion, just respectful observation. Think of it like religious window shopping. Historians still debate how deep that respect truly ran. Did Genghis genuinely see value in these beliefs, or was he just being politically savvy? Some scholars argue he was deeply pragmatic. Others think he had a superstitious streak that made him hedge his spiritual bets. The truth probably sits somewhere between a diplomatic scroll and a dream about a two-headed eagle. But even in this tolerant atmosphere, things aren't always harmonious. Some Muslim practices confuse the Mongols like the ban on alcohol. Mongols love alcohol. It's a core food group. So when a Muslim scholar politely declines a goblet of fermented mare's milk, things get awkward. There's also the issue of pork, not a staple in Mongol cuisine, but still enough to spark some culinary misunderstandings at royal banquets. You meanwhile ride through Karakoram, now bustling with tents and traders. In one corner, a Chinese astrologer reads omens from turtle shells. In another, an imam sketches geometry diagrams in the sand for curious children. It's chaotic, diverse, and kind of beautiful. Like a college campus during finals week only, with more fur hats and fewer existential dread posters. At night, around the fire, one of the younger warriors tells you that he started fasting during Ramadan. Not because he converted, he just heard it builds discipline, and discipline wins battles. You nod, not entirely sure if that's how it works, but impressed nonetheless. The fire crackles lower and the stars begin to shimmer. You lie back on your saddle blanket and listen to the wind, which tonight carries fragments of Persian poetry, Buddhist mantras, and Quranic verses all drifting together into one strange, sleepy hum. It is not yet Islam's empire, but you can feel the empire listening. You're squinting into the sun, trudging through the dusty corridors of a Persian town that now flies Mongol banners. The writing on the shop signs has changed, some replaced with Turkic scribbles, some just knocked down entirely. But in the courtyards and mosques, the calligraphy remains Arabic, delicate and flowing like silk turned to ink. This is your first time in a city that wasn't built by horsemen, and it's a bit overwhelming. The air smells of cardamom and charcoal. You pass a street-side scholar debating with a butcher about the finer points of free will. You half listen, then realize you don't actually speak Persian. Yet somehow the cadence feels familiar. These people talk a lot more than steppe folk, and more importantly, they write everything down. This is where the Mongol conquest begins to evolve, not just in swords and skull piles, but in pens. Diplomacy becomes a paper game. Mongol scribes must now navigate Islamic legal codes, Persian court etiquette, and complicated translations involving 5 alphabets and 3 gods in the room. And you poor writer have found yourself stuck in a Mongol diplomatic retinue sent to negotiate with a Muslim emir. You're told to be respectful. No mention of fermented horse milk. Try not to laugh during the ablutions, and whatever you do, do not insult the Prophet. You sit through the audience watching your Mongol superior squirm as the emir quotes hadiths and Quranic law to explain why the local mosque was not to be used as a stable. The Mongol replies with a story about how eagles don't respect buildings. It's not going well. Yet somewhere in that awkward exchange, something clicks. The Muslims are using religion not just as belief, but as administration. Courts, tax records, marriage certificates, it's all bound up in the Sharia system. For a Mongol who's used to solving disputes by horse race or wrestling match, this is like discovering spreadsheets for the first time. You trail the scribes as they copy legal decrees. They write in precise Arabic, then again in Persian, and finally in Uyghur script for the Mongol archives. The ink smells of cloves, and the pens are trimmed reeds. You can't help but admire their patience. You also learn they don't appreciate being asked whether the Prophet Muhammad could beat a tiger in single combat. Answer, not the point. Still, not all meetings are tense. One particularly curious Mongol envoy, probably under strict orders not to offend anyone, asked to observe Friday prayers. He removes his boot, sits in the back, and watches as hundreds bow in unison. Later, he tells you it was the most orderly thing he's ever seen, which for a Mongol is a high compliment. These cultural exchanges start building a bridge. Small at first, fragile, sometimes trodden over by accident. But the Mongols aren't just here to burn, they're here to learn, and the Muslims are remarkably still willing to teach. In private chambers, you see Persian astronomers showing Mongol generals how to read astrolabes, Muslim physicians explaining humoral theory using sketches of camels and carrots, and, of course, the mathematicians, always the mathematicians, teaching Mongol children how to divide things into equal shares that don't involve chopping them with an axe. Historians still argue whether this exposure was superficial or deeply transformative. Did the Mongols truly absorb Islamic values, or just adopt the tools they needed? Some say the conversions that would come later were just power plays. Others argue the influence started here in these dusty Persian courtyards with scribes who never touched a sword. There's also the practical angle. The Mongols needed administrators. The caliphate, though politically weakened, still had thousands of trained scholars who knew how to run cities, collect taxes, and write polite letters that implied you might be beheaded. This administrative class became essential to the Mongol state, and most of them Muslims. A quirky side note, one of the Mongol court translators became famous not for his language skills, but because he secretly compiled an Arabic Mongolian phrasebook. Among the entries were things like, "This goat is too expensive," and "Please do not throw fruit at the messenger." These little details show just how much work it took to bridge two worlds, and you too begin to pick things up. You learn to say "peace be upon you" in Arabic. You start washing your hands more frequently, not out of piety, but because, frankly, your last stomachache was terrifying. And you begin to notice the rhythm of the prayer calls, how they frame the day, how they seem to bring a kind of order to the chaos. It's not a conversion, but it's a shift, a tilt. You return to your yurt with your cloak dusted in city grime. That night, you sit by the fire, and instead of retelling battle stories, the elders are discussing a scholar from Nishapur who says the stars aren't gods, just light bent by invisible laws. It's unsettling. It's amazing. And the next morning, without fully understanding why, you don't ask for kumas. You ask for tea. The sky above you changes hue as you ride west, shifting from the endless blue of the steppe to the hazy ochre of Mesopotamian plains. The air is heavier here, scented with dust and jasmine and centuries of memory. You are approaching Baghdad, the glittering heart of the Islamic Golden Age, and the next tile in the Mongol domino trail. It's not the sprawling ruin that later storytellers like to paint, at least not yet. This Baghdad still lives. Its libraries hum with scholars, its bazaars pulse with poetry and figs, and its minarets pierce the heavens like calligraphy drawn in stone. You pass under arched gates inscribed with Quranic verse, and for a moment, even the Mongol banners seem to lower themselves in quiet awe. But you are not here as a tourist. You're with Hulagu Khan's army, and Hulagu is not interested in awe. He's here to destroy it. You ride past catapults lined up like sleeping giants. You watch as engineers, many of them Chinese or Persian, oddly prepare gunpowder pots flaming naphtha and siege ladders taller than palm trees. The Tigris flows beside you, wide and brown, unaware of the smoke that will soon choke its banks. Inside the city, the last Abbasid Caliph al-Mustasim prepares for negotiation. Perhaps he thinks that words or gold or prayer might stop the Mongols. They won't. Hulagu is patient, but he has a list. He sent messages before polite in tone, but not in meaning submit or be erased. Baghdad delays, so Hulagu proceeds. You watch the siege unfold in awful silence. Mongols encircle the city with precision that seems impossible for people raised in yurts. They divert rivers, collapse bridges, and build earthworks taller than mosques. The walls of Baghdad are old, strong, but they are no match for what's coming. You are there when the breach happens. What follows is frankly a horror. The Mongols pour in. Not just soldiers, but engineers, translators, even musicians, because why not loot a lute while you're at it? Fire's Rage, the House of Wisdom. A library that once held all the world's knowledge is said to bleed ink into the river until it runs black. Historians still argue whether this detail is poetic exaggeration or terrifying truth. Either way, it sticks. And the Caliph, you'll never forget it. Hulagu, playing with the cold kind of theatricality, refuses to shed noble blood. So he locks the Caliph in a room with all his gold and lets hunger do the work. A slow, bitter death surrounded by what he valued most. That's Mongol irony for you. But here's where it gets even weirder. In the aftermath of this devastation in a city piled high with manuscripts, minarets, and broken marble, you witness the first real fracture in the Mongol worldview. Some soldiers begin to hesitate. Some commanders, especially the Turkic and Persian ones, whisper their unease. Have we gone too far, they murmur. Was this holy others remain coldly efficient? But the questions have been planted, because for all their conquest, the Mongols are not immune to the majesty of what they're destroying. Baghdad's legacy lingers even in ruin. Muslim scholars surviving in hiding or spared for their utility continue to teach. They rebuild. They bring out books that had been buried for safekeeping. You meet one old thin as paper eyes sharper than any general's. He teaches you algebra using camel weights and market stalls. He quotes Quranic verses with mathematical precision. And when you ask why he still teaches after everything, he simply says, ink lasts longer than blood. That line follows you for weeks. And the Mongol high command, they start to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but Hulagu himself. Yes, the destroyer of Baghdad begins to favor Muslim advisors. He finds their knowledge useful, their calendars flawless, their legal systems surprisingly efficient, their medicine. Let's just say nobody wants Mongol field surgery if a Muslim physician is available. Even stranger Hulagu's wife Doku's Khatun is a Christian, but she doesn't oppose these changes. Religious tolerance remains policy, but within that tolerance, Islam begins to rise. You camp outside Baghdad weeks later. The fires have died, the rubble cools. But from the wreckage, life reemerges. You hear prayer again, quiet, defiant, somehow still beautiful. And now for the first time, you notice something. The Mongols are no longer just riding through the Islamic world. They're settling in it, sleeping in tiled homes, hiring Muslim tutors for their children, trying dates instead of goat meat, still drinking, yes, but learning to ask if something is halal before devouring it with both hands. And you find yourself imitating the scholars. You don't even realize it until one night sitting by a fire, you catch yourself whispering a verse you overheard at the mosque. You don't understand it. Not fully. But the words feel heavy with meaning. Something has changed. The Mongols have shattered Baghdad. But Baghdad quietly is beginning to rebuild them. You wake to the sound of hooves on scorched stone, echoing in what used to be a bustling bazaar. Smoke still clings to the corners of Baghdad, curling in alleyways like a ghost that hasn't yet realized the city is gone. But the Mongols, they're already moving on. There, Hulagu Khan, conqueror of Baghdad, rides ahead, his banners dragging through the air like cuts in the sky. He says little. His men say less. But word spreads quickly. What he did to the Caliph has become the stuff of hushed legend. People talk about it around fires, behind veils, beneath breath. You were there, you saw it. The Caliph once considered the shadow of God on earth, left to die in his own treasure vault. No blood spilled, just slow hunger and the bitter taste of irony. It's the kind of story that lingers especially in the minds of the faithful. And now you ride with the aftermath. Mongols establishing garrisons, quartering soldiers in madrasas, and assigning Turkic officers to rule over towns that still smell like ash. But here's the twist: amidst the rubble, there's still reverence. Not from the conquerors, from the conquered. Imams continue to lead prayers in mosques that weren't flattened. Teachers begin classes again in courtyards surrounded by broken fountains. People rebuild, not because they forgive, but because they endure. And even Mongols notice this. Some scoff, others watch. Take Hulagu's advisors. After Baghdad, they expand their staff: more Persian scribes, more Islamic jurists. Not out of guilt, but necessity. Mongols can conquer, but they can't administer. And Islam has administration down to an art form. You see it in action when a dispute breaks out over grain between two governors. A local qadi, a Muslim judge, settles it with a single recitation of hadith and a calm glance at a tax ledger. The Mongol commander nods. No screaming, no horse races. Just a verdict and peace. It's almost suspiciously civilized. Even more intriguing, Hulagu himself starts asking questions. Not publicly, certainly not in court, but behind closed doors in whispered conversations with scholars. He wants to understand the Quran, not to pray, but to rule. He asks why Muslims fast, how zakat works, and whether he can use religious law to justify new taxes. Classic Mongol logic, weaponized belief. One Persian vizier, always too clever for his own safety, writes a guidebook for Mongol governors explaining Islamic concepts in simple Mongolian phrases. The section on charity includes stick figure diagrams. The part on dietary laws includes a stern warning about mixing camel milk with seafood. You think he's joking, you hope, yet it works. Slowly you notice changes. Mongol officers ordering repairs to mosques not out of piety but to calm uprisings. Schools reopening under imperial approval. Muslim scholars receiving stipends for writing treatises on astronomy, ethics, irrigation. One surreal evening, you walk past a mosque being reconstructed with bricks stamped with the Mongol imperial seal. Hulagu's name right beside Quranic verses. The imam pauses mid-sermon to explain that yes, it's odd, but if the bricks hold the roof, the message can share the space. Historians still debate how sincere this respect was. Some argue it was manipulation. Others think it was the start of something real. After all, belief isn't always born from revelation. Sometimes it grows from repetition. And speaking of repetition, the Mongols are changing how they live. You see them bathing more often, though. More often means twice a season instead of once. You catch young soldiers quietly fasting during Ramadan, not because they were told to, but because the Muslim cooks stopped making breakfast. Even language is shifting. Words like inshallah slip into casual conversation. God willing becomes a phrase muttered before hunts, before battles, before opening another questionable wineskin. A paradox, yes, but a familiar one. Then there's the moment you never thought you'd see. Hulagu seated on a raised platform, listening to a Muslim scholar explain the 5 pillars of Islam. Not arguing, not mocking, just listening. His face is unreadable, his hands clasped. When the scholar finishes, Hulagu nods, once then asks, "And your God, he forgives those who burn cities." Silence follows. The scholar hesitates, then replies only if they seek to rebuild. Hulagu doesn't answer, but he doesn't leave either. Later that night, beneath the full moon, you pass Hulagu's private tent. A flicker of lamplight dances on the canvas. Inside, you hear pages turning. You wonder if they're Quranic verses or tax records. Either way, it's the sound of a shift, a crack in the wall of conquest. Not yet a conversion, but something more than curiosity. You sit by your own fire, staring into the flames, and realize for all the Mongols have broken, they are slowly being reassembled by the very people they sought to dominate. and somewhere far off a muezzin's call rises into the night. No longer an echo, now an answer. The road south from Baghdad curls like a frayed ribbon, tugging you deeper into Persian territory where the air grows cooler and the hills roll in slow, sleepy waves. You've left behind the shock of conquest, the ash-stained ruins, and the unsettling sight of Mongol guards standing beside Quranic calligraphy. What lies ahead is stranger still settling in. You ride through towns rebuilt from rubble, watching Mongol commanders trying to behave like governors. Some still bark orders like they're herding goats. Others bewilderingly now have administrative assistants, and they're usually Muslim. In one town square, you see something unexpected, a Mongol noble politely removing his boots before entering a mosque, not to pray, mind you, but to inspect the roof tiles. You snort. Progress. But the real shift begins in the homes, not the halls. Mongols accustomed to yurts and sky gods are now living among Persian gardens beside tiled fountains and rose bushes blooming beneath latticework balconies. And somehow the blue sky seems very far away. At the heart of this transformation is education. You find yourself visiting a madrasa, an Islamic school now receiving Mongol patronage. Inside, students chant verse and memorize law while Mongol guards stand outside pretending not to listen. One day, a Mongol boy sneaks in wide-eyed and sits at the back. He doesn't understand the language yet, but he stays, because learning real deep structured learning is intoxicating. You sit with scholars debating Aristotle and Al-Ghazali, measuring the stars and the soul in the same breath. One man shows you a model of the planets made from copper and string, spinning gently like a child's toy. See, he whispers, we are small, but not insignificant. That night, you lie awake under Persian stars and wonder if Tengri would approve. Now here's where things take a twist. The scholars begin shaping the children of Mongol nobility. Not just with words, but with worldview. And the parents. Surprisingly tolerant. If their sons grow wise, patient, respected, what does it matter how they got there? One boy, Ghazan, stands out. Bright eyes. Quick mind. Mongol by blood, but Persian by heart. He studies Islamic law, astronomy, even theology, though he also still practices archery before breakfast naturally. He's not a Muslim, not yet, but he listens when the imam speaks. You watch this slow drift the way Mongol children start reciting Arabic greetings fasting during Ramadan and memorizing lines of Persian poetry praising God. You hear them whisper things like Bismillah before stepping into cold water. And the architects, oh, the architects. Mosques now rise with Mongol funds, blending step simplicity with Persian ornament. Domes shaped like helmets. Minarets tall as signal towers. Carpets where once there was bare earth. Even the calligraphy changes. Mongol scribes learn to write Quranic verses in looping elegance that mimics galloping horses. One day you visit a new mosque on the edge of the steppe. It smells of jasmine and damp stone. In its courtyard, a group of Mongol warriors bow awkwardly in prayer, their boots lined up beside their sabers. One sneezes during sujud and whispers a confused apology. Nobody laughs. Historians still argue how sincere this wave of mosque building was. Were they signs of genuine belief or just acts of political appeasement? Some claim the Mongols were hedging their bets, donate to a mosque here, fund a Buddhist temple there. Others say it was the natural outcome of immersion. But you see it happening. The hesitation, the imitation, the eventual embrace, and not just among nobles. In markets, Mongol merchants now begin their sales with "Peace be upon you." In kitchens, cooks ask whether the meat was properly slaughtered. Even the local drinking songs now reference the mercies of the most gracious, usually right before someone falls off a bench. Your friend Togai, a grizzled cavalryman, tells you he's thinking of converting. Why, you ask? He shrugs. The prayers are calming, the laws make sense, and the food, honestly, much better without boiled marmot. You nod. Progress indeed. Still, nothing's official. No grand pronouncements, no state conversions. But the empire is tilting, like a massive beast slowly turning its head toward Mecca. And you caught in the middle start whispering those verses under your breath again. Not out of fear, but out of habit. You're sipping tea brewed with saffron and something you're pretty sure used to be a root, seated under a cypress tree beside a caravanserai that didn't exist a decade ago. The air hums with conversation, Arabic, Persian, Mongolian, Turkic, occasionally interrupted by a sneeze from someone unfamiliar with desert pollen. It's here in this dusty mosaic of trade and prayer that the Buddhists make their move. Yes, while Islam is quietly seeping into Mongol life through scholars, cooks, and city tax law, the Buddhists arrive with flair. Chanting monks, crimson robes, prayer wheels that spin like cavalry lances. They don't just teach, they perform. Hulagu's court, open to persuasion, and famously religiously flexible, receives them with interest. His wife, Doku's Khatun, remains a devout Christian, but the Buddhist monks, they're something new. They bring gifts of silk tales of past lives and diagrams of the universe shaped like a lotus. You watch Mongol lords squint at the images trying to make sense of karma while chewing goat jerky, and the monks are strategic. They offer teachings and tax advice. One particularly bold lama pitches a plan: exempt Buddhist monasteries from tribute, and in return, they'll pray for Hulagu's eternal enlightenment and train his accountants. Oddly, this works. For a brief period, Buddhist lamas oversee parts of the Mongol revenue system. You see temples rise beside mosques. In some towns, Mongol soldiers ask both imams and lamas to bless their arrows before battle. It's a spiritual buffet, and no one's chosen the main course. One quirk of this time, the Mongols begin blending things in ways no one expects. Buddhist chants echo in barracks. Quranic verses appear next to mantras on tavern walls. You once saw a falcon with a charm tied to its leg containing both a Buddhist sutra and a small scrap of a sura, hedging bets clearly. But this flirtation with Buddhism doesn't last forever. Why? Because Buddhism, despite its appeal, remains distant. It's built around monastic life reincarnation cycles and abstaining from worldly pleasures. Mongols, let's be honest, are not big on abstaining. They like meat, fermented drinks, loud music, and not being reborn as squirrels. A few lords take it seriously, but the rank and file never quite buy it. You overhear one warrior mutter, "I don't want to come back as a worm. I want to win now." Islam, by contrast, offers something more grounded. A legal system that works. A worldview that doesn't ask them to give up meat or horses. A God who is powerful, singular, and surprisingly relatable to a people already inclined toward an all-encompassing sky deity. And Islam isn't just making inroads at the top, it's rising from below. In caravan routes, Muslim merchants outnumber Buddhist monks 10 to 1. They bring with them not just trade, but ideas. Stories of the Prophet's wisdom, tales of just rulers, practical things like business ethics, interest-free loans, and communal charity systems, all of which fit neatly into the growing Mongol towns. You spend one evening in a roadside inn listening to a debate between a Buddhist monk and a Muslim jurist. The topic, reincarnation versus resurrection. The monk argues the eternal cycle of rebirth. The jurist counters with accountability, final judgment, and the moral weight of your actions in this one life. A soldier sitting nearby sums it up. So, one says, "I get another shot." The other says, "This is it." He sips his soup. I prefer knowing the rules. Islam, he decides, is clearer. Historians still argue why the Mongols ultimately didn't adopt Buddhism en masse. Some blame cultural mismatch. Others point to Islam's grassroots growth versus Buddhism's more top-down attempts at influence. A few cynical voices suggest that Muslims were simply better at marketing, cleaner, more structured, and already woven into the economies the Mongols were trying to control. Whatever the reason, you can feel it shifting. One day you pass a temple abandoned. The lama is gone, the walls stripped of gold leaf. Nearby, a new madrasa is under construction, simple, clean, efficient. The call to prayer echoes across the valley. No chance today. And the Mongols. They're listening. They're still uncertain, still pluralistic in name. But increasingly their hearts and their paperwork speak Arabic. And you, without even realizing it, start ending your letters with "in the name of God," the most merciful, the most compassionate. Not because someone told you to, but because it sounds right. It's early morning and the camp is still asleep. You step quietly between sleeping horses and curled up warriors, making your way toward the faint clinking of pots and murmurs of early risers. A pot of lentils bubbles over a low fire. A merchant stirs it with one hand while flipping through a worn Quran with the other. He looks up and grins. "You're late for suhoor," he says. You blink confused, then it hits you it's Ramadan, again. At some point, without ceremony or proclamation, Islam has become the rhythm of life around you. Not decreed from a throne, not enforced by sword. It seeped in from the kitchens, the streets, the shared roads, and the marketplace bargaining rituals. The cooks converted first, then the guards, then the scribes, then the traders, and finally the camp followers. The elite still wear their amulets and consult oracles when battles loom. But when it comes to feeding the troop, settling contracts, and planning travel, Islamic customs now lead the way. Mongol pragmatism has met Muslim practicality, and the two have shaken hands without realizing it. You notice it again when a group of soldiers argue over loot division. Rather than the usual yelling, they call for a qadi, a legal scholar, a religious judge. 10 years ago, they'd have wrestled each other shirtless until one passed out in a goat trough. Now they want jurisprudence. In the next town, a Mongol caravan enters to the rhythm of hooves on cobblestone, greeted not by trembling locals, but by curious children and smiling merchants. You watch as a commander exchanges a bundle of silver for spices and includes a small calculated donation to the local mosque. Just enough to keep things smooth. Why the change? Because Islam is now the common language of empire. Not spoken necessarily, but understood. The etiquette, the expectations, the rhythm of the day prayer, rest meal trade prayer again. It gives time structure. It makes chaos manageable. For a culture that once relied solely on instinct and tradition, that structure is seductive. You see it clearly when a young Mongol rider, barely 16, sits beside you after the evening prayer and asks about ablution rituals. He's heard they protect against bad luck. You begin explaining the symbolic purity, the discipline, the mindfulness. Halfway through, he interrupts. "Does it help with archery?" You shrug. "Only your soul." He nods, satisfied. And it's not just habits, it's belief. You start hearing Mongols refer to Allah instead of Tengri. You notice funeral prayers said in Arabic, not whispered to the sky. Newborns are given names from the Quran, and every now and then you catch a commander privately reading the Quran before dawn, lips moving silently over verses he can't yet fully translate. Historians still debate how much of this early wave of conversions was genuine faith versus social survival. After all, being Muslim now means access to scholars' protection under Islamic law and a smoother ride through cities like Tabriz, Mosul, and Damascus. But does that make it less real? You pass a village where a wedding is taking place. A Mongol bride in silk, her family offering rice and lamb, the imam reciting verses over the couple. There's laughter, joy, The kind that doesn't care where it came from, just that it fits. And you long skeptical find yourself participating more than observing. You fast during Ramadan not out of obligation, but because it feels grounding. You help a young boy memorize a surah, surprised to find you know most of it already. You give a coin to a beggar and feel not superior, but anchored, like you're part of something bigger. There's a moment under a moonlit sky when a group of soldiers bow toward Mecca. You watch them, Mongols all silent, synchronized. Their movements no longer awkward or hesitant. It hits you Islam didn't ride in on the backs of imams or conquerors. It came with the cooks, the merchants, the midwives, the people who couldn't win battles but could win trust. And now, in this strange new world where Mongol yurts rest beside domed mosques, where a sword may be forged by a Muslim blacksmith and blessed by a Buddhist monk, you realize something even stranger. The empire has changed, not by force, but by familiarity. You return to camp. The merchant is still stirring lentils. He gestures at a bowl. Eat, he says. You've got time before Fajr. You sit, and for the first time, you eat not just as a guest in a Muslim world, but as part of it. By the time you reach the mountain passes of northwest Iran, the air is thinner, cooler, and remarkably quiet. You hear less about conquest these days and more about supply chains, marriage contracts, and theological debates. It's here, tucked between the shifting steppes and the Persian heartland, that a storm brews not of war but of conviction. His name is Ghazan. You remember him as a boy, watchful, sharp, slightly impatient, always asking too many questions. Now he's a man, a warrior, a statesman, and very soon a Khan. Ghazan Khan isn't just any ruler. He's the first Mongol leader in Persia to officially convert to Islam. And it's not a quiet little personal choice made in a palace garden. No, Ghazan makes it public, performative, and unmistakably political. Picture this: he announces his conversion in a Friday sermon. The court is packed. The imams are nervously clearing their throats. And Ghazan stands there in full Mongol armor, declaring the Shahada, the Islamic profession of faith, with a clarity that leaves no room for misinterpretation. There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God. Boom! The Ilkhanate, the Mongol realm in Persia, has just shifted on its axis. Naturally, not everyone is thrilled. Buddhists grumble. Nestorian Christians raise eyebrows. A few shamans stomp off to burn some incense and mutter to the wind. But Ghazan is firm. Islam isn't just his faith, now it's the state's. And he doesn't stop at conversion. He makes it policy. From now on, Islam is the official religion of the Ilkhanate. Pagan rituals banned. Public displays of Buddhism discontinued. Church influence greatly reduced. Ghazan walks a very fine line, declaring Islam supreme while still offering personal protections to Christians and Jews under Islamic law. But the message is clear: we are now a Muslim empire. You attend a court session shortly after the announcement. Everyone is slightly on edge. There's a rumor that Ghazan wants to reorganize the entire tax code to match Islamic principles. Sure enough, a scholar stands before the court reading from a new fiscal directive based on zakat, the Muslim charity tax. It's dry, it's complex, but it's revolutionary. Ghazan isn't just praying 5 times a day, he's Islamizing governance itself. He mandates the building of new mosques, funds madrasas, appoints qadis, Islamic judges, to replace traditional tribal arbiters. And for good measure, he orders the standardization of weights and measures because he believes justice starts at the market stall. Also, he was apparently really irritated by short sacks of flour. Historians still argue whether Ghazan's conversion was heartfelt or merely a brilliant political move. He had plenty of reasons. Most of his subjects were Muslim after all, and aligning with them meant stability, loyalty, and smoother governance. But he didn't have to go this far. He didn't have to recite Quranic verses from memory during military parades. He didn't have to sponsor Quran copying campaigns across Anatolia. He didn't have to personally attend sermons every Friday, even when he was nursing battle wounds. And yet he did. You notice it in the details. The new calligraphic motto above the treasury gate, "Victory comes from God alone." The royal coins now minted with Arabic inscriptions. The elite guards wearing cloaks embroidered with surah fragments. The court musicians composing nasheeds, religious songs for feast days. Even the feasts change. Less wine, more dates. Meat still flows freely, of course it's still the Mongols, but now there are prayers before eating and fasting during Ramadan as expected, even among generals. And Ghazan, he doesn't stop being Mongol. He still loves horses, still launches campaigns, still has people executed for incompetence, though now he makes sure it's halal. But he's no longer swinging between belief systems. He's anchored, and his subjects notice. You pass a mosque in Tabriz where a crowd gathers to watch the Friday sermon. The preacher quotes not just Quran, but Ghazan himself. A ruler must serve God before he serves men. That line echoes into alleys and shop fronts. You see it painted on walls, sewn into carpets, whispered into the ears of children. The Mongols, once feared as apocalyptic horsemen from the east, are now protectors of the faith. Strange, isn't it? You recall the first time you rode into a Muslim town. How the people trembled, hid prayed for mercy. Now they pray with their rulers. And you who have watched this empire evolve from sky-worshipping nomads to book-carrying bureaucrats, find yourself writing a letter home that begins not with the horse's name or a battle report, but with, "In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful." You sign it, a servant of the Khan, and perhaps something else. You're perched on a flat rooftop in Tabriz as the sun sets, casting a coppery sheen across the domes and spires of the growing capital. Below you, the call to prayer unfurls through the air like a silk ribbon, caught in wind soft, slow, and unignorable. Children chase each other past the mosque courtyard. A muezzin's voice rises from a newly built minaret, his melody bending slightly on the breeze. You lean back against a warm brick wall and sip sweetened tea watching the city that Ghazan Khan remade. But tonight's story isn't about him. It's about the man behind the curtain. His name is Nasir al-Din Tusi, and he's probably the smartest person in the empire. Mathematician, astronomer, philosopher, bureaucrat Tusi is a walking encyclopedia with a beard and a master plan. And unlike many scholars, he's not content just writing books. He's writing the future. You first encounter him during an audience at the Maragay Observatory, a sprawling campus of domed buildings, sundials, armillary spheres, and students who look constantly over-caffeinated. Tusi greets you with the distracted air of someone halfway through solving the universe. Around him are tables filled with astronomical charts, mechanical clocks, and strangely piles of Mongol correspondence. All power, he says with a smile, needs charts and calendars. Otherwise, you attack during a dust storm. He wasn't always so well positioned. Once a Shia scholar in hiding, he survived the fall of the Ismaili fortress at Alamut, famously surrendered to Hulagu Khan, and depending on which version of the story you believe, talked his way out of execution by promising to predict the stars more accurately than anyone else. Bold. And it worked. Instead of dying, he became chief advisor. Now he runs the empire's most advanced scientific center under Mongol patronage. You tour the observatory and find star maps so precise they'll still be accurate centuries later. Tusi's team is creating trigonometry tables, planetary models, and even revising Aristotle. The place feels less like a medieval think tank and more like a medieval NASA. But here's the twist: Tusi doesn't just deal in stars. He deals in people. He teaches Mongol rulers about Islam not by preaching, but by calculating. He explains the lunar calendar, the logic of zakat, and the geometry of mosque domes. He tutors young princes in ethics and political theory, slipping in verses from the Quran, right between lessons on astronomy and city planning. You watch one of his students, an Ilkhanate noble, try to understand divine unity using a chart that looks suspiciously like a sheep trading diagram. It works, kind of. The Mongols trust Tusi because he speaks in the language they understand: order, precision, results. He's not trying to replace their beliefs, he's offering a better system. And to their surprise, that system includes prayers. Historians still argue about how much influence Tusi had. Some say he Islamized the Mongol court without them noticing. Others argue he merely created the intellectual space for conversion to occur naturally. Either way, his fingerprints are everywhere, especially in the new laws, the curriculum, and the empire's curious obsession with measuring everything. One night, you catch a glimpse of his public persuasion tactics. A Mongol general complains about fasting during Ramadan. "It makes my sword arm weak." Tusi responds calmly, "And yet the prophet fought at Badr while fasting. Shall I recite how that ended?" The general blinks, then changes the subject. You start noticing a quiet trend. Scholars are becoming celebrities. Poets are being quoted at royal banquets. Religious legal experts, faqiehs, are drafting new policies that align with both Islamic principles and Mongol authority. Even art changes. You visit a manuscript workshop where painters illustrate Quranic stories with Mongol styling's Noah's Ark, looking suspiciously like a step tent on stilts. The prophet's horse with braided hair and a saddle fit for a khan. It's charming and telling. Islam is no longer just accepted. It's being translated, adopted, adapted. You meet Sufi mystics preaching at caravan stops, welcoming both Mongol traders and local peasants. Their message: Islam is vast, big enough for both the scholar and the soldier. You see warriors with prayer beads hanging beside their swords, quoting Rumi between battles. You even hear of Mongol commanders who refuse to attack on Fridays, not because it's forbidden, but because it doesn't feel right. One man claims that his arrows fly truer when he prays beforehand. Another says he dreamt of the prophet riding a black horse across the steppe. Whether true or not, the symbolism matters, because Islam is no longer just the religion of the people the Mongols rule. It's becoming the faith of the ones doing the ruling. And you sit under the stars at the Maragay Observatory, staring at a sky that Tusi mapped better than anyone before him. You remember when the stars belonged to Tengri, the eternal blue sky. Now they are part of God's creation ordered, named known. A new cosmos, for a new kind of Mongol. You arrive in Shiraz under a lavender sky, just as the call to prayer weaves itself through the rustle of apricot trees and the soft clinking of market stalls closing for the evening. This is no longer the raw, trembling world of conquest. The Mongols, once defined by chaos and motion, now preside over a landscape of minarets, gardens, and mosques. Yes, dozens of them. And they're not just attending prayers, they're building the places to pray. Everywhere you go, Tabriz, Hamadan, Nishapur stone masons are at work. Brick kilns puff like dragon nostrils. And more often than not, the names etched on foundation stones belong to Mongol patrons. You trace your fingers across one inscription on a mosque wall commissioned by Arghun Bey, servant of Allah. Strange times. You remember when Mongols built only what they needed: stables, armories, yurts. Function first, beauty later, if at all. Now they're sponsoring mosques as both political statements and spiritual offerings. And they're grand. You walk into one in Kazvin and feel the hush wrap around you like velvet. The columns are thick and strong, built to echo step tents. The archways, however, are pure Persian, delicate, fluted, impossible. Light spills in through windows carved in geometric patterns. You swear the walls hum with quiet breath, with then your eye catches something even stranger. The mihrab, the prayer niche that points toward Mecca, is inlaid with Mongol motifs. There's a falcon in the tile work, a bow worked into the border, step meeting script, and somehow it works. This isn't cultural conflict, it's fusion. Even the mosque courtyards have traces of Mongol practicality wide paths for mounted messengers, flat stones that resist hoof damage, and fountains built deeper than usual because Mongol horses like to wade in them, allegedly. You've seen it once, maybe twice. But perhaps most telling are the inscriptions. These are not merely Quranic verses. They are dedications by converted Mongol nobles. May Allah forgive my sins and grant strength to the Ilkhan built in the year I first fasted during Ramadan, in memory of my son who died with the Quran in his saddlebag. You stop at that one for a long time. The scholar guiding you through the mosque tells you it's part of a growing trend. Mongols commissioning Waqf endowments. That is donating land or revenue to fund religious institutions, mosques, schools, hospitals. In return, they gain baraka blessing and a reputation for piety. It's not just about faith, it's about legacy. And it's not just elites. You meet a former cavalryman named Timur, who now serves as the caretaker of a small mosque outside Isfahan. He still keeps his saddle polished in the corner just in case, but mostly he sweeps the floor and lights the oil lamps before evening prayer. He tells you that after years of battle, he prefers the sound of water trickling from the ablution basin to the clash of steel. There's still a battle, he says, but now it's with the self. He chuckles, harder war. Even Mongol women are entering this architectural awakening. You visit a madrasa funded by a Princess Fatima Khatun, daughter of a Mongol governor who insisted the building have wide courtyards, elaborate water features, and dedicated spaces for female students. You see them there bent over illuminated Qurans speaking Arabic with accents shaped by the steppe. Historians still puzzle over just how much influence these Mongol-sponsored mosques had. Some say they were mostly performative, a way to signal piety and secure alliances. Others argue they were the architectural manifestation of a true spiritual shift. Either way, they became landmarks anchors in the new Islamic Mongol identity, and you begin noticing the way mosques are changing the landscape. Where once you saw only plains and yurts, now the horizon breaks with domes. Where once you heard only hooves and wind, now the call to prayer marks the hours. And in the architecture itself, you see something remarkable. The steppe never really disappears. It adapts. The bricks carry memories of felt tents. The wide spaces recall open skies. The geometric patterns evoke horse trails on snow. You attend a Friday sermon at one of the larger mosques. The imam preaches in Arabic, then repeats his message in Persian for the locals, then again in Mongolian for the officials. His theme, unity, not just of God, of people, of paths. He closes with a prayer for the Ilkhanate, may our rulers walk the straight path, and may their swords be sheathed when wisdom suffices. A few soldiers nod thoughtful. Outside the courtyard is bathed in gold. Birds nest in the minaret's crevices. And you, standing in a space once unimaginable for Mongol hearts, whisper Amin under your breath. It feels natural, earned. You look back one last time before leaving, watching a line of worshippers, shoulder to shoulder, Persian, Turkic, Mongol, facing the same direction, bowing in the same rhythm, and somewhere in the domes above a falcon carved in tile seems to nod in approval. You ride eastward now through wind-bent fields and hills that ripple like frozen waves toward a place where conquest finally gives way to something like poetry. The air is cooler and the landscape quieter, as if the earth itself is holding its breath. You're entering the late phase of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol realm in Persia, where the swords have mostly been sheathed and the scrolls have taken their place. This is where things get poetic, literally. Because somewhere along the road from destruction to devotion, the Mongols picked up a quill and started writing ghazals. Yes, ghazals. Love poems. Verses about wine and longing and gardens and the mystical yearning of the soul for the divine. The same people who once used catapults to hurl corpses over city walls are now quoting Hafiz and Rumi debating metaphors by candlelight. You find yourself in a library in Yazd, built on the ruins of an old fortress. Where there were once barracks, now there are books. The smell of ink has replaced the stink of leather armor. A Mongol noble reclines on a carpet reading a Sufi treatise with the same intensity he once reserved for military maps. How do you conquer the heart? He asks the room. A nearby scholar smiles. You don't. You surrender to it. Welcome to the Persianization of the Mongols. It's not that they've forgotten who they are. No, they still ride, still hunt, still toast with enthusiasm that could shatter porcelain. But culturally, they're blending in. Their children speak Persian as a first language. Their court rituals echo those of the ancient caliphs. And their poets now write like they've always lived beneath domes, not beneath stars. Take Rashid al-Din, historian, vizier, and court intellectual. Under his guidance, the Mongols begin documenting everything. You visit his scriptorium and find scribes translating Chinese medical texts, recording Mongol genealogies, and composing official histories of the Prophet Muhammad in Mongolian. It's an empire with an archive, and that's new. You see the shift in how they remember. Once the past was oral, sung around fires. Now it's written in gold leaf on bound pages. And not just histories, commentaries, legal codes, even cookbooks. One Mongol scribe proudly shows you a recipe for lentil stew suitable for fasting warriors. Even architecture gets lyrical. You pass a Kanka, a Sufi lodge funded by a former Mongol general. It features courtyards shaped like horse hoof prints, and verses from the Quran etched into saddle-shaped niches. The Sufis here chant not just in Arabic but in Turkic and Mongolian, inviting warriors to dance in circles and contemplate the oneness of being. One night you attend a poetry recitation at the home of a high-ranking Ilkhanid official. He wears a robe embroidered with Quranic verses and a belt stitched with a Persian poem about the pain of love. A dervish performs a slow spinning movement while musicians play the Naya reed flute that sounds like it's weeping. And when the host speaks, he does not boast of conquest. He quotes Rumi, "Try to be a sheet of paper with nothing on it. Be still and let God write upon you." You feel a shift in the air. The Mongols are no longer just following Islam. They're living it through language, through rhythm, through beauty. Historians still debate this period. Some call it the decline of the Ilkhanate, a softening, a fading of the old Mongol flame. Others see it as an evolution, the wild energy of the steppe turned inward, redirected toward philosophy, art, and law. You're not sure it matters what word you use. You watch a Mongol artisan carve a prayer into the side of a fountain. O God, turn our thirst into remembrance. You hear children reciting Quranic verses beside the tales of Genghis. You hear laughter in madrasa courtyards and footsteps in libraries once guarded by swords. The Ilkhanate is no longer simply a Mongol state. It has become something new. A hybrid, a conversation, a place where the horse and the rose grow from the same soil. And you sit by a window as the sun sets, pen in hand, copying a verse you heard earlier. From the east came thunder, from the west came prayer. Together they made the sky sing. You're not sure who wrote it, but you suspect it was someone who wore both armor and ink-stained sleeves. The dust on the road to Konya clings to your boots like a memory you can't shake. This isn't Ilkhanid Persia. Now you've crossed west where other Mongol fragments drift through Anatolia, some still roaming, others settling like dandelion seeds blown too far from the stem. And in this part of the Islamic world, the Mongols don't just convert, they whirl. Yes, whirl. You first see it at sunset outside a modest lodge near the city where Sufis in white robes turn in silent circles beneath a cypress tree. At first, you think they're dancers, maybe mad. Then you see the Mongol watching arms crossed, face unreadable. He leans over and whispers something to his interpreter, who nods and replies, "They are remembering God." The Sufi orders, especially the Mevlevis, are magnetic to certain Mongols. Maybe it's the rhythm. Maybe it's the humility. Or maybe it's that Mongols raised on the roar of wind and hooves can finally find a stillness here that feels cosmic. You watch Mongol converts approach these mystics not with suspicion but with curiosity. One removes his boots and joins the circle. His spinning is clumsy, but his face is serene. Later, you meet a dervish named Safi al-Turkmani, born to a Mongol mother and a Persian father. He wears a patched robe and carries nothing but a Quran and a flute. His poetry is wild. In one breath, he speaks of Gabriel, in the next of Genghis. Both, he says, move at the speed of fire. He tells you that the Sufi path is perfect for people raised without books, but full of longing. We do not always need to know how God is. Only that he is. You nod. You've met Mongol generals who couldn't explain a verse, but wept when they heard it sung. And then there's the music. Oh, the music. Mongol lutes play beside Arab ouds. Persian daf drums mix with steppe throat singing. You witness a Sufi gathering where a Mongol convert recites the 99 names of God with the same cadence he once used to list his ancestral clan. It's haunting and beautiful. The Mongols once roared across the world with arrows and fire. Now they murmur God's name with wind and breath. Historians still argue whether this was true belief or just the allure of Sufi hospitality. After all, the lodges offer food protection and community, something many rootless Mongols badly need. But you've seen enough faces in candlelight to know this isn't just survival. It's surrender, not the kind forced by siege, but the kind chosen. And the Sufis, they don't judge, they don't demand, they welcome. You hear one say to a newly converted Mongol, "You have ridden far, but God has been riding with you." In cities like Herat and Balkh, the Sufi lodges become gathering places for traders, warriors, and scholars. They debate Tawhid, the oneness of God, while passing bowls of lentils and warm flatbread. One man insists the universe is just a dream in God's mind. Another nods solemnly while trying not to fall asleep in his soup. You visit a khanqa where a former Mongol officer now teaches Quran recitation with a voice like gravel and thunder. His students adore him. He still swears like a cavalryman, but now he adds, "God forgive me," after every second curse. It's oddly charming. And then there are the dreams. You hear countless stories of visions. A falcon that spoke in Arabic, a rider with no face who pointed toward Mecca, a river that turned to ink and wrote the word Allah across the sky. Most are probably exaggerations, but they matter, because they show how the Mongols, once the authors of nightmares, have begun to dream. You spend one evening by a fire outside a Sufi lodge listening to a group of young Mongols recite poetry. "We crossed the world with fire, but found God in a whisper." They all go quiet after that one, even the wind. And you realize that something irreversible has happened. The Mongols aren't just Muslims now. They are Muslim Mongols. Not converts, not imitators, something new. Their Islam is flavored with horses' drums, endless skies, and bitter mare's milk. It's imperfect, uneven, deeply felt. You stand beneath a moon that once watched cities burn. Now it watches men spin in circles, praying. And for once, no one is chasing anything. Only turning, only remembering. You stand atop a windswept hill just beyond the city of Acre, the Mediterranean. glittering far in the distance. Below you, a battlefield is being cleared. Armor clinks, horses snort, and the cries of wounded men echo like fading thunder. It's the aftermath of a clash that will ripple across continents. You've just witnessed the Battle of Angelut 1260, the day the Mongols lost. And not just to anyone. To the Mamluks, a slave soldier army forged in the crucible of Islamic power, disciplined like iron and fiercely protective of Cairo, Damascus, and the faith itself. The Mongols, who swept away caliphates and crushed cities without blinking, have been stopped. Their famed general Kitbuka, reportedly a Christian, has been captured and executed. The surviving Mongols retreat into Syria stunned, and in the stunned silence that follows, something fundamental begins to crack. Because this wasn't just a military loss, it was a moral one. Until now, the Mongols had looked unstoppable. They claimed divine backing spoke of fate like it was a blood-stained ledger, and moved as if no enemy could last more than a prayer. But the Mamluks stood firm, and they did so in the name of Islam. You see the impact almost immediately in Mongol-held territories. Imams begin quoting Ain Jalut in sermons not as a battle but as a proof, a sign that God had not abandoned them, that Islam tested in fire had prevailed. In Ilkhanid Persia, where Islam is still taking root among Mongol elites, you sense a pause. Converts look to Cairo with a mixture of envy and inspiration. Doubters wonder aloud if Kitbuka's defeat proves that Allah does not favor the unbelievers. One former Mongol officer says to you at a bathhouse, "Perhaps we should have fasted before the battle, not feasted." You laugh, then realize he wasn't joking. The Ilkhanate and the Mamluk Sultanate now represent two competing Muslim powers, one freshly converted, awkwardly adapting, the other steeped in Islamic tradition, wielding faith like a polished blade. And the tension between them isn't just political, it's deeply spiritual. In the years that follow, their rivalry will shape Islamic identity. Mongol rulers begin making overt religious gestures, building more mosques, hosting public Quran recitations, attending Friday prayers, not just as kings but as believers. It's both political theater and sincere yearning. You attend one such gathering in Tabriz. A Mongol emir known for his drinking and temper walks to the front of the mosque barefoot and recites the Shahada aloud slowly, deliberately, with tears in his eyes. No one mocks him, because now belief is a shield. It's protection from humiliation, a way to reassert purpose after the sting of military failure. Historians still argue whether Ain Jalut caused the Mongol embrace of Islam or simply accelerated it. Some say the defeat cracked the myth of Mongol invincibility, opening hearts to faith. Others claim the Ilkhanid court needed to salvage authority and saw religion as the fastest glue. You think it's both. Because something has changed. The rhetoric shifts. Before Ain Jalut, Mongols said, "We rule because the heavens chose us." After Ain Jalut, they begin saying, "We rule because we submit to the one God." Submission, not a word they liked before, but Islam reframes it. In the Mongol language, submission had always meant defeat. Now it's power through humility. And that fits oddly well. Back in Syria, you see a bizarre consequence of the battle. Mamluk commanders admiring the Mongols. Yes, they just fought them, but they acknowledge their courage, their tactics, even their ability to adapt. Some Mamluks begin dressing with step flourishes. A few even start reading Mongol military manuals translated into Arabic. There's a quiet respect in the dust. You return to Persia weeks later to find a court poet writing a verse titled, "The Day the Horse Bowed." It describes Kitbuka's defeat not as shameful but as redemptive, a turning point. A time when arrogance shattered and the Mongol spirit found space for God. You recite it in a tea house and the old men nod. One says the Mamluks won with faith. Maybe we will too. And so the Mongol conversion to Islam stops being a curiosity. It becomes a cause. Mosques are no longer just monuments. They're messages. Madrasas are no longer just schools. They're safeguards. Even the soldiers, once skeptical, now wear verses stitched inside their tunics. Some still drink in private, still mutter prayers to Tengri under their breath. But Islam has claimed their public identity. You visit the tomb of a fallen Mongol commander and see engraved in Persian he came to conquer and was conquered by the truth. You stare at that for a long time. And when you look up, you see children at play. One shouts to another, "Let's ride to Cairo and beat the Mamluks." The other yells back, "Only if we pray first." You smile. Not because the rivalry is over, but because the story has changed. They are no longer invaders on the edge of Islam. They are stubbornly, unmistakably part of it. You're in the inner courtyard of a palace in Sultaniyya, where soft sunlight spills across turquoise tiles, and the air smells faintly of cardamom and fresh ink. A scribe dips his pen and whispers a prayer before committing another line of law to the imperial record. You notice something new about this place, something subtle but unmistakable. There are women in the corridors of power. Not many, not loud, but they're there. And they're not just pouring tea and raising sons. They're building madrasas, funding wahhabs, and weighing in on which jurist should advise the Khan this week. If you want to understand how deeply Islam has taken root among the Mongols, don't look only at the men reciting Quran after battle. Look at the women stitching verses into their children's tunics. Look at the princesses who now wield faith as power. Take Ulyetu's court, for example. His mother, a devout Muslim woman of noble Mongol lineage, ensures her son is educated in both Quranic exegesis and Persian administration before he's old enough to saddle his own horse. She arranges debates between Sunni and Shia scholars at court, not because she loves conflict, but because she believes only sharpened minds can wield justice. You meet another woman, Khadija Khatun, widow of a governor, who oversees the construction of an entire Sufi lodge on her own land. She rides out daily, inspects the progress, and personally chooses the calligrapher to inscribe the dedicatory plaque. "If I cannot ride in battle," she says to you with a wry smile, "then let me raise armies of prayer." Her endowment contract is airtight, carefully reviewed by a Quaidi, and when it's complete, her name is carved beside the entrance, not hidden behind a husband's, but shining in her own right. Historians still wrestle with the extent of Mongol women's influence during the Islamization process. Some suggest it was informal, wielded through marriage alliances and maternal guidance. Others argue it was structurally significant. Women acted as bridges between the old Mongol worldview and the new Islamic order. You've seen too many veiled figures leaning over account books to think it was symbolic. In private homes, women host Quran circles offering tea and commentary in equal measure. In elite compounds, princesses engage in fiqh debates while embroidering surahs into the hems of royal garments. One even commissions a copy of the Quran in Uyghur script because Arabic is hard but devotion finds a way. And it's not always about faith. It's about culture. You walk through a madrasa library and find a collection of folk tales rewritten, with Islamic moral endings funded, you learn, by a Mongol noblewoman named Sayyida Banu. Her endowment specifies that half the books be accessible to girls. They must learn to read before they learn to bow, she says. Even funerals have changed. Where once warriors were left on the steppe under eagle-filled skies, now their daughters recite duas over stone graves, carved with Arabic inscriptions and step symbols side by side. You attend one such ceremony and notice a girl no older than 10, tracing her fingers over the basmalah and mouthing the words, her voice barely above the wind. You meet mothers teaching Quranic stories in tents, wives correcting their husbands' wudu technique, daughters asking Sufi teachers about divine love with the same boldness their fathers once asked for tribute. One retired Mongol soldier tells you half joking, "I used to fear the Christians, the Buddhists, and the Mamluks." Now I fear my wife's tafsir lessons. He chuckles, then adds, she remembers every verse, every one. You believe him. There's a tenderness in this transformation, but also a firmness. Mongol women don't abandon their identity, they expand it. A princess may wear a hijab, but it's woven from dyed felt and fastened with a carved bone clasp, a nod to her ancestral roots. A matriarch may pray 5 times a day, but she still chants Mongol lullabies to her grandchildren at night. The blend isn't awkward, it's seamless. Islam gave these women language, legal, spiritual, poetic, and they've used it to shape the very empire that once marched across their world in fire and steel. Now they raise mosques, not maces, and they build futures with paper and prayer. As you leave one such estate walking past a prayer hall, filled with the gentle murmur of young girls reciting Quran, you feel it deep in your bones. This isn't just Islam arriving, it's rooting. And the ones planting the seeds, often silently, firmly, faithfully, are the women. The wind rises again as you move east, this time toward the Yuan dynasty's imperial capital, Khanbalik, the city we now call Beijing. You've left behind the poetry of Persia, the mosques of Anatolia, the Sufi whirl of the West. Here the Mongol Empire takes on its other face the court of Kublai Khan. It's familiar and unfamiliar all at once. You enter through vast gates under fluttering banners of dragon and horse. Chinese courtiers glide between tiled courtyards. Tibetan lamas whisper prayers. Mongol guards stand at attention, their brows furrowed, as they try to keep track of 5 different languages being spoken around them. And Islam? It's here, but awkwardly. In the Yuan court, Islam has a foot in the room, but not always a seat at the table. You meet a Muslim astronomer, Jamal ad-Din, brought in from Persia to calculate the calendar. The emperor respects his precision, but doesn't quite trust his theology. He calls him the man who knows the sky but speaks too softly of heaven. You meet a meat inspector from Bukhara, tasked with enforcing halal slaughter for the Muslim quarter. He's under constant pressure from palace chefs who insist pork dumplings are culturally essential. The man spends more time negotiating than inspecting. He sighs and tells you, even Allah cannot stop banquets in this place. There's tension here. Kublai Khan rules a multicultural empire, but he's Confucian at heart, Buddhist in aesthetics, and deeply invested in order. Islam, with its singular God and ritual commitments, sometimes feels unruly. When Muslim officials request Fridays off for communal prayer, the emperor hesitates. When they refuse to participate in state ceremonies involving ancestral spirits, eyebrows rise. You hear of a short-lived edict banning certain Muslim and Jewish practices altogether halal, slaughter circumcision, under the argument that they're barbaric. Muslim officials push back. So do Jewish ones. Eventually the law is softened, but it leaves a mark. Historians still debate Kublai's motivations. Was it xenophobia, political consolidation, or just the challenge of ruling a palace where no one could agree on which god got the first bowl of rice? Either way, Islam in the Yuan dynasty never quite becomes central. It's present, important, even just not fully embraced. But it's persistent. You walk through Khanbalik's Muslim quarter, Nujie, where mosques hum with life. The architecture is unique, sloped roofs, no domes, no minarets, but unmistakably Islamic in spirit. You see Mongol Muslims, Central Asian merchants, Chinese Hui converts, all gathered under carved wooden eaves facing west to pray. One elderly imam explains it best: in this court we are not honored, but we are enduring. Still, the undercurrent of frustration shows. Many Muslim officials eventually leave the Yuan court, returning to Persia or Samarkand. Others stay adapting as they must, translating Quranic ideas into Confucian terms, trying to explain Tawhid with diagrams about harmony. And sometimes It works. A Mongol prince becomes fascinated with Sufi poetry. He commissions a painting of Rumi's verses onto silk. Another funds a madrasa outside the capital far from court eyes. A Chinese convert begins writing Quranic exegesis using Buddhist metaphors. The Quran is the river, the prophet the boatman, God the shore beyond sight. You smile, it's clumsy, but sincere. And the people always find a way. Merchants still fast during Ramadan even if they have to pretend it's a new form of stomach meditation. Children memorize surahs in back rooms. Butchers mutter Bismillah before each cut, even if they're working quickly under the gaze of Confucian inspectors. Islam here becomes quieter, not less devout, just strategic. You attend a nighttime gathering where Muslim scholars debate theology in low tones. One says, "In Persia we shouted, here we whisper." Another replies, "Whispers last longer." A third adds, "The camel walks, but the silk reaches the sea." The conversation shifts to prayer. One man has built a miniature compass into his ring to help him find the Qibla. Another has memorized prayer times based on shadow lengths. Innovation born from constraint. It reminds you that Islam has never been a monolith. It's always been an adaptation machine, flexible without losing its core. You've seen it on the steppes in the desert, in tiled Persian courtyards, and now, here hidden behind lacquered doors in a Confucian court. And you walk back through the alleys of Khanbalik, watching smoke rise from a kitchen in the Muslim quarter. A woman calls her children in. A man kneels on a prayer rug facing west. No minaret sounds, no muazzin calls, but still the prayers rise. Because here in the East, Islam isn't loud. It's lived. You follow the caravan south now, where the steppe ends and deserts sprawl out in slow, shimmering waves. The horses are quieter here, the air heavier. You're no longer riding with petty khans or provincial governors, you're riding in the shadow of someone far more ominous. His name is Timur, or as most of the world will come to know him, Tamerlane. He's not a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, but he claims the bloodline anyway through his mother, his marriage, his dreams. And more than any Mongol, since Hulagu Timur fuses the raw flame of steppe warfare with the rising tide of Islamic devotion. You don't meet him at first, you feel him. Cities emptied, markets hushed, mosques trembling under the weight of tribute demands. He moves like a sandstorm preceded by messengers quoting both hadith and ultimatums. His flags bear Quranic verses. His horsemen wear green armbands stitched with Bismillah, and when you finally glimpse him high on a platform outside Samarkand, his eyes like flint, you understand the contradiction. Timur is a Mongol-Muslim hybrid forged in fire and ambition. He prays 5 times a day and orders entire cities put to the sword. He recites verses about mercy and builds pyramids of skulls. Historians still argue what to make of him. Was he a devout Muslim or a master manipulator of faith? Was his piety real or just a velvet sheath for his iron will? You sit with his court imam one evening, a tired man with trembling hands, and ask what Timur's favorite surah is. The old man replies without hesitation, Al-Fath, the victory. Then adds softly, but I wish he loved Al-Rahman more. Still, the truth is complicated. Timur funds madrasas, dozens of them. He fills libraries, builds mosques with towering domes, and orders the copying of Qur'ans in calligraphy so delicate it seems etched by moonlight. Samarkand, his capital, becomes a jewel of the Islamic world. You walk its streets and feel like you've stepped inside a prayer made of stone. Blue tiles blaze in the sun. Scholars debate in courtyards beside fountains shaped like open palms. Children memorize surahs while pigeons roost above domes, so perfect they might have been whispered into existence. And Timur himself, he fasts during Ramadan. He insists on proper ablution before battle. He once postponed a siege because the moon signaled aid, but he also razes cities that insult him, slaughters prisoners en masse, and boasts of being a scourge sent by God. You witness one chilling event firsthand. After conquering Damascus, Timur assembles its religious leaders and asks them politely whether God favors him. One scholar, perhaps too brave or too tired, says, "Only God knows." Timur smiles and spares him, just that once. You find yourself haunted by him not just for his brutality, but for how deeply and sincerely he believes he's doing God's work. You read a letter he sends to a rival Muslim ruler quoting the Quran fluently, then threatening divine punishment in the same breath. It's not hypocrisy, it's conviction turned blade. But his influence is real. Under Timur, Islam spreads deeper into Central Asia. Mongol lineages that once clung to Tengri and tradition now trace their ancestors through Quranic genealogies. Turkic tribes recite prayers before battles. Even cities he destroyed are rebuilt around mosques and madrasas in his name. In India, after defeating the Delhi Sultanate, Timur takes scholars and artisans back to Samarkand instead of treasure. You meet one of them, an Indian architect now building a Mukarna ceiling beneath stars he still doesn't trust. He shrugs, he burns, then he builds. And through it all, Timur's empire becomes a strange blend of brutality and beauty. You can't walk 10 paces without hearing Quranic verse, but you can't forget the rivers that once ran red after his conquests. You sit with a young student in Samarkand memorizing Al-Fatiha. He tells you his father was killed by Timur's soldiers, but he still studies at a madrasa built with Timur's gold. He doesn't know how to feel about that. Neither do you. Because this isn't the peaceful scholarly Islam of Nasir al-Din Tusi, or the mystical Islam of the Sufis, or even the awkward whispered Islam of the Yuan court. This is Islam as empire armor. Magnificent, bloodstained, convincing. Timur dies eventually. He had planned to march on China. Some say he was taken by fever, others by God's judgment. His body is wrapped in green cloth, lowered into a tomb, etched with stars and the words, "When I rise from the grave, the world shall tremble." Spoiler, it won't, but the memory of him still does. And long after his dust settles, the mosques he built still echo with prayers. You hear one as you pass through Samarkand's outer gates, a boy reciting Surat al-Nas, his voice cracking slightly, uncertain but determined. Behind him, pigeons take flight over blue domes. And in that moment, for all the terror Timur left behind, you feel something strange. Continuity. The horsemen are gone. But the prayers remain. You cross the Oxus River beneath the sky smeared with twilight, its pinks and purples bleeding into the current like spilled pigment. Beyond the water lies a different world, not quite Mongol, not quite Persian, not entirely Arab. This is Transoxiana, where Timur's influence has settled into marble and manuscript, and where Islam and Mongol legacy stretch their roots into new soil. But further southeast and west, wherever the Mongol world once extended, small fires of its legacy still flicker. You begin to see the outlines of the last Mongol khanates, scattered like islands after a flood. Not empires, not yet nations, but echoes, and most of them Muslim. You ride into the Khanate of the Golden Horde centered around the Volga River. The name still strikes fear in old memories, but what you find is not a horde, it's a court. The Khans now rule from cities like Sarai and Bulgar, not from the saddle, but from thrones beneath painted ceilings. Islam here arrived through trade as much as conquest. Merchants from Bukhara and Khwarazm brought not only textiles and spices, but also copies of the Quran, the sayings of the Prophet, and the idea that a ruler should be just not merely victorious. You meet a Khan named Ozbek, not terrifying, but regal, robed in silk and fur. His eyes sharp with both ambition and something that looks almost like peace. He's credited with making Islam the official religion of the Golden Horde. His coinage bears the Shahada, and his legal system is now a hybrid of steppe, custom, and sharia. He still drinks, but not publicly. He still calls on the old spirits, but quietly. More importantly, he builds. Mosques rise along the Volga. Madrasas flourish in the steppe towns. You meet a Mongol imam who quotes both Ibn Taymiyyah and Genghis Khan in the same breath without irony. A bit awkward, but somehow it works. Then there's India. Yes, even there where Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis, will found the Mughal Empire, he is not a nomad. He is a gardener of faith and form. Under him and his descendants, Islamic art architecture and law blossom. The great Taj Mahal, many years in the future, will be designed by Muslim architects descended from Central Asian traditions with Mongol bones still in their name. Islam didn't just enter the Mongol world. The Mongol world became part of Islam. You pause in a caravanserai near Multan, where the evening call to prayer echoes beneath an arch carved with both Arabic script and Mongol storm symbols. A merchant explains the design: we pray to one God. But we came here on horseback. Far west in Egypt, Mamluk chroniclers still write about the Mongol invasions. But now those invaders are fellow Muslims. Diplomats from the Ilkhanate visit Cairo bearing gifts and letters that begin with, "In the name of Allah," instead of threats. It's diplomatic whiplash. And then there are the Sufis, always the glue. You attend a gathering in Bukhara, where a Naqshbandi sheikh leads a Mongol disciple in dhikr, the remembrance of God. They sit shoulder to shoulder, whispering divine names into the night. No one asks who his grandfather conquered, only who he praises now. Historians still puzzle over how thoroughly the Mongols converted. Some say it was skin-deep of political convenience. Others point to the sheer number of mosques, libraries, and scholars funded by Mongol patrons. Still others note how the Mongol legacy continues in Islamic law, mysticism, and literature. You've walked the path. You've heard the prayers. It's more than surface. It's sediment-layered, settled, weathered into permanence. Even language bends. In the Chagatai tongue, phrases like Inshallah and Alhamdulillah are woven into lullabies. Children with steppe blood memorize Quran under the watch of teachers with eyes shaped by the wind. And the architecture, it evolves. In Kazan, mosques rise with conical domes shaped like yurt roofs. In Herat, Quranic verses wrap around minarets like galloping horses. In Anatolia, calligraphy dances beside sword patterns and eagle wings. You finally return to Persia, now ruled by descendants who barely speak Mongol, but still carry Genghis Khan in their lineage like a whisper in their blood. A mosque plaque reads, "Built by Yusuf Khan, son of Tuglu, servant of the one God." You stand beneath it for a while, thinking of all the sons and grandsons, the Khans and Emirs, the soldiers and cooks, the astronomers and Sufis who walked this long, strange road. From blood to belief, from conquest to call to prayer, from thundering hooves to whispered amines. And you walk the streets of Samarkand one last time. You pass a mosque shaped by Mongol gold and Persian stone. You hear children reciting Quran in a courtyard where once horses were shod. You stop beneath an arch that blends Mongol strength and Islamic grace. And you realize this isn't the end of the Mongols. It's their beginning in a different key. Dawn breaks gently over the hills of Central Asia, and you sit at the edge of a village courtyard wrapped in a wool shawl that still smells faintly of saddle oil and wind. The world feels still now, almost fragile. But beneath the quiet lies 1,000 years of movement, conflict, longing, and belief. You've walked through fire and minaret yurt and mosque scroll and sword. And now, as the final chapters of the Mongol Islamic story unfold, you begin to understand something deeper. This was never just a story about conversion. It was about transformation on both sides. Islam did not merely absorb the Mongols reshaped Islam too. You begin to see it in the texture of everyday life. A boy leads a horse with Quranic verses embroidered on its bridle. A mosque is constructed using Mongol geometry, angular, vast, built to echo across plains rather than valleys. In cities once flattened by conquest, festivals now ring with drums and prayers, with nasheed choruses that recall cavalry chants. It's all one story now, one rhythm. You're in Bukhara again, where the madrasa courtyards still echo with lessons, laughter, and the drone of memorized hadiths. A Mongol-descended teacher draws a diagram on a chalkboard, a circle labeled divine unity lines radiating like sunbeams. Faith, she tells her students, is like the steppe wide without end. A child asks if God rides a horse. Everyone laughs. She answers seriously, he rides in our hearts, and sometimes hearts gallop. You remember how the Mongols first encountered Islam? Suspicious, curious, indifferent? You think of Genghis Khan tolerating religions like tools in a chest hulagu Khan, reducing Baghdad to cinders while scholars fled with scraps of knowledge tucked in their robes. But those scraps survived. They were planted, and over time they grew. Now Islam in the post-Mongol world is no longer one thing. It's plural, alive, uncontainable. It carries Mongol traits, adaptability, boldness, mobility, and oddly a respect for order in chaos. You see this most clearly in the legal codes. Mongol rule helped standardize tax structures, codify protections for religious scholars, and develop robust documentation practices that blended Islamic Sharia with steppe pragmatism. Even centuries later, Ottoman and Mughal law would echo with systems rooted in Ilkhanid Persia. You visit a court in Kashgar where a judge refers to the old yasa before delivering a verdict. The Yasa Genghis Khan's ancient code now intertwined with Islamic jurisprudence like ivy on a stone wall. A hybrid. A living archive. Historians argue, of course they do. Some claim Islam conquered the Mongols, that the purity of faith triumphed over barbarian violence. Others argue the Mongols used Islam to legitimize their rule the way they once used shamans, oracles, or Buddhist monks. But you've seen it. You've walked through centuries of this strange union. You know better. It wasn't one conquering the other. It was a conversation. A long, dusty, beautiful conversation between the bough and the book, the whisper and the war cry, the camel and the falcon, the god of the desert and the wind of the steppe. And like all meaningful conversations, it changed both sides. You meet a Mongol imam whose ancestors once burned Qur'ans and now write commentaries on them. He smiles when you mention the irony. God is patient, he says, and so is history. You smile too, and then you stand because the mosque bell is ringing. Not a literal bell, of course, but a voice. A call. A sound that once rang through minarets as Mongol armies approached in the distance, and now rings with them. You enter, and pray beside descendants of Genghis, shoulder to shoulder, facing not toward the eternal blue sky, but toward Mecca. You walk once more along a narrow path between cypress trees and crumbling mud brick walls. A breeze rustles the leaves above your head, and in the distance a call to prayer rises not loud but steady, familiar, comforting. You've walked a long way. From the howls of wolves on the Mongol steppes to the hushed peace of desert mosques, from battle chants to whispered du'as from cities burning, to verses blooming again from the ashes. And now you arrive at the last breath of this journey. The last Mongol Khanates have long since faded. The Ilkhanate dissolved. The Chagatai Khans quietly merged into local courts. The Golden Horde splintered into Khanates that were swallowed by time. The Yuan collapsed into dust and revolution. But their Islamic legacy remains not in banners or bloodlines, but in minarets, manuscripts, and names whispered over newborns. The empire that once called the sky its god now kneels on prayer rugs facing the Kaaba. You walk through a graveyard on the edge of a quiet village, perhaps in Uzbekistan, perhaps in northern Iran. It's hard to say anymore. The headstones bear Arabic script and Mongol names. One reads, Kutluk Banu, daughter of Barak Khan. She memorized the Quran, raised falcons, and recited poetry beneath almond trees. Another, Tukhluk, son of no fewer than 3 Khans. He fasted in Ramadan. He wept when he heard Surah Maryam. He never again touched the bow after he first touched the book. You pause. A breeze moves through the grass like a sigh. Here lies the final truth: Islam did not merely survive the Mongols. It absorbed them. Patiently, relentlessly, softly, faith outlasted fire. Knowledge outlasted conquest. And here in the twilight of empires, prayers still rise. You hear them as you pass a school built on the ruins of an old Mongol garrison. Children recite with bright, unbroken voices. They don't know what once stood here, only that now it's sacred ground. You watch a blacksmith pause between hammer strikes to whisper, Bismillah. You see a wedding party with ululations and horsehair streamers, the bride's dress lined with Quranic verses and Mongol beadwork. And you understand, the story is no longer about how the Mongols became Muslim. It's simply that they are. Where they once conquered the Islamic world, now they live within it, not as foreigners, but as part of the call to prayer, the rhythm of the minbar, the architecture of domes that still rise like steppe horizons. It was never about erasing the past. It was about transforming it. And so you walk one final time beneath the stars. You remember Genghis Khan, who sought no god but the sky. You remember Hulagu, who leveled Baghdad, but unwittingly planted seeds. You remember Ghazan, who bent his neck in prayer and changed history. And you remember all the unnamed ones, cooks, grooms, scribes, and soldiers who quietly embraced a faith, not because they were forced, but because they saw something in it that felt true. In the end, you sit beneath a tree. You lean your head back. You close your eyes. You remember the sound of hooves, now replaced by the hush of evening prayer, and the wind whispers, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness. And so do you. And now, with the story softly closing around you, let the final images drift gently through your thoughts. The grasslands of the steppe, the domes of Samarkand, the silent arches of a forgotten madrasa. Picture the riders slowing their pace, the horses unbridled at last. The bow hung beside a prayer mat in the corner of a quiet tent. Let the dust settle. Let the maps fade. You've traveled far from fire to faith, from chaos to quiet devotion. And here at the end of this 1,000-year death of empire, there is no more galloping. Only gentle breath. The kind that speaks not of conquest, but of contemplation. Picture that moonlit courtyard, the flickering oil lamps, the sound of pages turning in the hands of a child learning to recite for the first time. His voice unsure but steady. Imagine the whisper of wind through the mosque's latticework. The murmur of prayer echoing across stone, softened by centuries. You are safe now. You are still. The empire is gone, but the story lives. It lives in the way belief reshapes even the fiercest hearts, in the way the sword becomes a pen, in the way strangers become brothers praying in the same direction. Let all of it fade. Now the armies, the politics, the fires, the names. Only the echo of a prayer remains, and the quiet pulse of history still beating beneath your feet. Sleep well, traveler. You've come far. I'll be here with another story for you tomorrow night.